There are things you never expect to find in your mailbox. A letter confirming you've won the lottery you never entered. A handwritten note from your neighbor apologizing for their dog treating your lawn like a public restroom. Or, in my case, an official notice from the HOA declaring that security cameras were now forbidden. Yeah. You heard that right. I pulled the letter out of the envelope, scanned the ridiculous wording, and had to sit down before my brain melted from sheer stupidity. Effective immediately, all external cameras, including but not limited to video doorbells and home security surveillance, must be removed from HOA properties. This decision was made to preserve the aesthetic integrity and privacy of the community. Aesthetic integrity? Privacy? The only thing my camera invaded was the raccoon that kept trying to break into my trash cans like a tiny, masked criminal. I crumpled the letter in my fist, resisting the urge to set it on fire and mail it back. Instead, I grabbed my phone and shot a message into the neighborhood group chat. Me. So, anyone else get the big brother is watching, but only if he's not you letter from the HOA? Reactions flooded in. Angry emojis. Memes of dictators in HOA uniforms. A particularly dramatic gif of someone flipping a table. It was clear I wasn't the only one pissed off. Then came the classic HOA response. A follow-up email reminding us that non-compliance would result in appropriate action, aka fines, harassment, and more Karen energy than one human should be forced to endure. Fine. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. I showed up at the next HOA meeting, arms crossed, the infamous letter in hand. The queen of the HOA, a woman named Patricia, who had the aura of a medieval tyrant but dressed like she had just stepped off a yacht, smiled like she owned this neighborhood, which, in her mind, she probably did. Beside her, the HOA treasurer, Bob, sat with the enthusiasm of a man who had long since accepted that his soul belonged to the HOA board. Cleared my throat. So, Patricia, tell me, exactly what part of my doorbell camera is threatening the aesthetic integrity of this neighborhood? Patricia's smile twitched. It's not about aesthetics, dear. It's about privacy. Privacy, I repeated. Right? Because when someone's breaking into my house at 2 a.m., the first thing I should think about is their right to privacy. Bob coughed. We believe that home security is a personal choice, but you're making it illegal? I cut in. That's an interesting definition of personal choice, Bob. Patricia's expression hardened. This decision was made in the best interest of the community. Oh, cool. Did the community get a say in it? Or did you just decide that for us between sips of overpriced Chardonnay? Silence. I could see Bob shift uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at Patricia. Interesting. Well, Patricia said finally, her tone clipped. The rule stands. Cameras must come down. If you refuse, you will be fined. And repeated violations will result in further action. I gritted my teeth. HOA fines weren't cheap, and they loved handing them out like candy on Halloween. But I wasn't about to roll over. Instead, I nodded. Fine. I'll take care of it. Patricia smiled, assuming she'd won. But what she didn't know was that I was about to handle this my way, which meant my camera was staying up. And, more importantly, I was about to find out exactly why they wanted them gone so badly. So, with Patricia's smug little smile still seared into my memory, I decided two things. One, that camera was not going anywhere, and two, I was going to find out what these HOA overlords were really up to. Meanwhile, the HOA's harassment didn't let up. Letters kept coming, piling up like junk mail, each one more ridiculous than the last. Fines threatened to reach the GDP of a small country, and Patricia's minions started doing daily compliance checks. One day, Karen, yes, an actual Karen, came by to deliver the latest threat. Her face was the human embodiment of a screech, eyebrows furrowed into a permanent frown of disapproval. You know, she began, voice dripping with self-righteousness. It's people like you who make this community unsafe. I raised an eyebrow. Unsafe? Karen, the only thing unsafe here is how much hairspray you use near an open flame. She huffed, looking ready to either explode or write me a strongly worded letter. Probably both. Just take the camera down, or there will be consequences. Oh, I'm shaking, I said, feigning terror. Just tell Patricia that if she's that concerned about my camera, she can come over and take it down herself. Karen stomped off, but not before snapping a photo of my house. What she was planning to do with that, I had no idea. Maybe make a voodoo doll. I wasn't about to let Patricia and Bob turn the neighborhood into their personal fiefdom. If they wanted a fight over cameras, they'd get one, just not the way they expected. My first move? A stealth upgrade. I swapped out my doorbell camera for something with a little more reach. Technically, it was inside my house, perched discreetly on a windowsill, aimed right at the street. I was ready to catch every shady HOA stroll by and raccoon heist that came my way. And why did I need that camera so badly? Well, let's just say my neighborhood had a borrowing problem, tools, packages, and once my Halloween decorations. Apparently, my inflatable skeleton was too tempting to resist. The next week was like living in a badly scripted reality show. HOA board members prowled the streets like mall cops on Black Friday, clipboard in one hand, binoculars in the other. Neighbors whispered about surprise inspections, like this was some kind of militarized gated community. They knocked on doors with that polite aggression only HOA members can pull off. Half smile, half threat. But every time they came to my place, I greeted them with the world's most innocent expression and a front porch as bare as their souls. Good afternoon. A chirp waving like a model neighbor. What brings you by? Oh, cameras? Nope, none here. Just me and my peaceful, unmonitored home. They'd squint, murmur something about fines, and trudge off. Meanwhile, my camera rolled on, recording every nosy patrol. But that wasn't enough. I needed more dirt, real evidence that this whole privacy crusade was as fake as Patricia's tan. So I started digging. I hit the internet first, diving into public records like a conspiracy theorist with a Red Bull addiction. Meeting minutes, budget reports, suspiciously vague line items labeled community enhancements. Whatever the hell that meant. Then I took it old school, door to door, chatting up neighbors who were just as fed up. Mrs. Thompson, who swore she'd seen Patricia replace perfectly fine park benches with HOA approved models at triple the cost. Or Old Man Jenkins, who muttered darkly about HOA funds disappearing faster than beer at a backyard barbecue. The deeper I went, the dirtier it got. Misappropriated funds, shady contracts, even some creative bookkeeping that would make the IRS salivate. And just when I thought my HOA scavenger hunt couldn't get any juicier, I found a former board member on Facebook, a guy named Rick who'd moved states just to escape HOA tyranny. Rick was more than happy to spill the tea. Apparently, back in the day, our dear treasurer Bob had a little bookkeeping issue that conveniently disappeared when Patricia became president. By this point, my folder of HOA sins was thick enough to rival a Tolstoy novel. I had spreadsheets, screenshots, even grainy photos of questionable maintenance projects. But fate decided to throw me a plot twist worthy of a daytime soap opera. One night, while reviewing the footage from my stealth camera, popcorn in hand, naturally, I nearly choked on my soda. The screen showed Bob, yes, our Bob, slinking through the shadows like a second-rate burglar. He crept up to Patricia's door, looking both ways like he was about to rob a bank. Moments later, Patricia herself opened the door, dressed in what I can only describe as a come-hither robe. And Bob? He didn't just step inside. Oh no, he practically dove in. My jaw dropped. HOA treasurer by day, Patricia's midnight lover by night. I hit pause, rewound, and watched again, half expecting Ashton Kutcher to jump out and yell, "You've been punked!" Nope, it was real. I leaned back, grinning like a kid who just found out Christmas came early. This wasn't just HOA corruption. This was a full-blown scandal. Suddenly, the camera ban made perfect sense. It wasn't about privacy. It was about keeping the neighborhood blind to their little rendezvous and whatever else they were hiding. I looked at the stack of evidence on my desk and the paused video on my screen. If Patricia and Bob thought they could bully me and the rest of the neighborhood into submission, they had another thing coming. I was done playing defense. At the next HOA meeting, this bombshell was going to blow up their little empire, and I was going to light the fuse. The day of the HOA meeting finally arrived, and I had never been more excited to watch two people's lives implode in real time. I showed up early, dressed like the perfect, obedient homeowner. Pressed shirt, polite smile. Not a single hint that I was carrying enough evidence to turn this meeting into a true crime documentary. Patricia sat at the head of the room like she was presiding over a royal court. Bob, her loyal treasurer and midnight visitor, sat beside her, fidgeting with his pen. The rest of the HOA board members were scattered around, looking vaguely uninterested, like they just wanted to get through the meeting and go home to yell at their kids or overwater their lawns. Neighbors filed in, murmuring about new fees, parking complaints, and whatever new nonsense the HOA had cooked up. Nobody suspected that tonight's meeting was about to go off the rails. Patricia cleared her throat and gave her signature condescending but pretending to be friendly smile. "Welcome, everyone. We have a full agenda tonight, so let's begin." She launched into some painfully dull HOA business, budget reports, rule reminders, a weirdly long monologue about mailbox regulations. I sat patiently in the back, waiting for my moment, like a snake coiled and ready to strike. Finally, she started wrapping up. "Now, before we conclude, does anyone have any final concerns?" I stood up. "Showtime." "Yes, actually. I have a few things to go over," I said, casually lifting the folder, the thick stack of evidence I had compiled over the past few weeks. "And I'll need access to the projector." The room shifted. People sat up a little straighter. Patricia's face twitched like she had just smelled something rotten. "Well, this is highly irregular," she said, her voice tight. "Perhaps you could submit a formal request for the next meeting?" "Oh, I think everyone here is going to want to see this now," I said, making my way to the front. "Trust me." Bob shifted uncomfortably. Patricia let out a clipped laugh, the kind people do when they're trying to act unbothered but are secretly panicking. "Very well," she said, "but let's keep it brief." Oh, Patricia. Sweet, delusional Patricia. This was about to be anything but brief. I plugged in my USB drive, and the screen flickered to life. I turned to the audience, flipping open my folder for dramatic effect. "Now, I've spent the last few weeks looking into our wonderful HOA," I began. "And I have some questions." I clicked to the first slide. A spreadsheet. HOA expenses line by line. "Bob," I said, looking directly at the sweating treasurer, "can you explain why we spent $12,000 last year on community landscaping, when there hasn't been a single new plant added to this neighborhood in years?" Bob's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Patricia shot him a quick glare before pasting on her fake smile. "Well, these expenses are approved by the board," she said smoothly. "Everything is accounted for." I smiled. "Right? Just like the $8,500 that was supposedly used for park maintenance on a park that doesn't actually exist." The murmurs started. People leaned toward each other, whispering. I could see the anger brewing. "Hold on, let's keep going," I said, clicking to the next slide. A few blurry, zoomed-in photos. Now, you might be wondering why the sudden camera ban. Was it really about privacy? I hit play. The video began. Bob creeping up to Patricia's house. The stolen glances. The door opening. The not-so-subtle invitation inside. The room collectively gasped. I turned to Bob, whose face had drained of all color. Now, I'm not saying HOA funds were misused, but is that where our park maintenance money went? Because it sure looks like something is being maintained at Patricia's house. A strangled noise came from the front. Bob looked like he was deciding between bolting for the exit or simply melting into his chair. Then came the explosion. "You lying son of A.B." Bob's wife, who I had honestly forgotten was here, shot up from her chair, pure rage burning in her eyes. "You told me you were out, surveying the neighborhood," she shrieked. "Is that what you call it now? Surveying Patricia's bedroom?" The room was chaos. People gasped, whispered, laughed. Patricia's face went from ghostly white to tomato red. Bob stammered. Honey, I can explain." "Oh, I bet you can," she snapped. "Where else have you been surveying, huh?" Patricia, in full meltdown mode, slammed her hands on the table. "This is irrelevant. We need to stay on topic." "Oh, I think we're very on topic," I said, my grin widening. "Because not only have you two been embezzling HOA funds, But you've been using them to fund your little extracurricular activities. Bob's wife lunged. Bob flinched so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. Meanwhile, the neighbors had fully turned on the HOA. "This is outrageous," someone yelled. "I want a full financial audit," another shouted. "I knew those damn fees were suspicious." Patricia tried desperately to regain control, but it was too late. The mob had formed. I let the chaos unfold for a few minutes before delivering my final blow. "Oh, and one last thing," I said, holding up a flash drive. "All this evidence? I've already sent it to the State Oversight Committee. So, good luck with that." Silence. Patricia blinked at me like a deer in headlights. Bob just looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And with that, I closed my folder, smiled, and walked right out of that meeting, leaving them to deal with the wreckage. By the time I got home that night, my phone was blowing up. The neighborhood group chat had gone from its usual petty complaints, who left their trash cans out past pickup, to absolute warfare. "Mrs. Thompson, did you see Patricia's face? I thought she was going to pass out." "Jenkins, ha ha ha." Bob's wife went feral. "Guy looked like he wanted to jump out a window." Random neighbor number 4. "Can we impeach an HOA president?" Asking for, everyone. Oh, I wasn't just reading these messages. I was savoring them, like a fine wine. Or, in this case, a cheap beer after a hard day of publicly dismantling a corrupt HOA. But while the chat raged on, I knew one thing for sure. Patricia and Bob weren't going down without a fight. The very next morning, HOA-issued letters of desperation arrived in everyone's mailboxes. The recent allegations against the HOA board are unfounded and based on misinterpreted data. We assure you that all financial decisions have been in the best interest of the community. We urge residents to disregard defamatory rumors and remember that HOA leadership remains committed to neighborhood excellence. Blah, blah, blah. Translation. We are very much guilty, and we are losing our minds. Naturally, I took my letter, tacked it to my fridge as a trophy, and waited for the next explosion. I didn't have to wait long. See, when you send a dossier of HOA corruption to the State Oversight Committee, they tend to take interest. And by interest, I mean they sent a team of accountants to tear through Patricia and Bob's financials like piranhas on a steak. The audit was brutal. Money missing, fake invoices, suspicious payments to contractors that didn't exist. And the best part? Bob had been really bad at covering his tracks. The man might have been an HOA treasurer, but he had the financial intelligence of a toddler with a piggy bank. By the time the auditors finished, Patricia and Bob were done. The final HOA meeting of the Patricia and Bob Reign of Terror was the single greatest event of my life. The room was packed. People who had never bothered to attend a meeting before were lining up for seats like it was a damn Taylor Swift concert. Patricia sat at the head of the table, but this time, she didn't look like the untouchable queen of the neighborhood. No smug smile, no condescending tone, just the exhausted, hollowed-out stare of someone who realized their entire empire was crumbling. Bob? He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, probably because his wife had already kicked him out, and now he had auditors, angry neighbors, and a very possible lawsuit breathing down his neck. One of the auditors stood up. "After reviewing financial records, we have found significant misuse of HOA funds, and we will be proceeding with legal action." The crowd erupted. Cheers. Applause. Someone in the back yelled, "Get REKT." Patricia tried to do damage control. "This is all a misunderstanding." "Then explain the fake invoices," someone shouted. "Well, some of the expenses, like the $5,000 community event that never happened? I had no idea about those discrepancies," she stammered. Bob, to his credit, made a spectacular decision in that moment. He pointed a shaking finger at Patricia and croaked, "It was her. She told me to do it." The room lost it. Neighbors booed. Mrs. Thompson actually stood up and threw her HOA handbook at the table. I just sat back, arms crossed, basking in the chaos. Within 1 week, Patricia resigned in disgrace. Well, resigned before they could vote her out. Bob was fired from the board and was now facing potential fraud charges. HOA members immediately voted for a full leadership overhaul. And the cherry on top, the camera ban, officially repealed. In fact, the new board encouraged cameras as a way to prevent further corruption, and you better believe I kept my camera up. Hell, I bought another one just for fun. Life in the neighborhood dramatically improved. No more arbitrary fines. No more corrupt nonsense. Just a normal, peaceful community, where people could live their lives without worrying about getting a ticket for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailbox. As for Patricia, she moved out within a month, unable to handle the daily shame stare from the entire block. Bob? Well, last I heard, he was trying to reconcile with his wife. But considering she changed the locks, I'm guessing it's not going well. And me? I just sit on my porch sometimes, coffee in hand, watching my camera feed. Not because I need to anymore, but because every once in a while, I like to replay that beautiful video of Bob sneaking into Patricia's house. Best HOA meeting ever.